You probably believe that what you stockpile is yours to keep, that the government respects private property when things get bad. That belief is going to cost people everything they built. Here is the truth. Under emergency powers, the legal authority that lets the government seize and redirect private resources the moment a disaster is officially declared, your stockpile is a target. Tonight, I'm walking you through the 5 specific items that get seized first. And I am telling you exactly what to do before the next declaration gets signed. If you are actively prepping right now, bookmark this. One of these 5 is something the government has been purchasing in classified quantities since the Cold War, enough to supply every federal employee in the country. And they have made it legally difficult for civilians to obtain more than a minimal amount at any one time. I am saving that one for the end. Picture this. It is 4 days after a major hurricane hit the coast. The power grid across 6 counties is down. You planned for this. You have 18 gallons of gasoline locked in your garage, enough to run your generator for 10 days. You feel ready? Then the state of emergency declaration hits your phone, and by the following morning there's a local ordinance in effect that allows authorized personnel to inventory and redirect stored fuel supplies across the county. That is not invented. That is the documented pattern from New Jersey and New York following Hurricane Sandy in 2012, and from Louisiana in the weeks after Katrina made landfall in 2005. The legal framework that makes it possible is the Defense Production Act, a federal law passed in 1950 that gives the president and state governors the authority to seize and redirect private resources the moment a national emergency is formally declared. Fuel sits at the top of that list every single time. Here is how the mechanism works. Think of it like a library book. Every dollar in a library book's value belongs to you while it sits on your shelf. But the moment the library sends a notice, the fact that it is in your home does not matter. Your fuel works identically. The moment emergency status is signed, stored fuel becomes what emergency planners classify as a critical infrastructure resource, treated the same way a hospital's backup generator would be, something too important to leave in private hands. FEMA's National Response Framework, the official publicly available federal disaster management manual that every agency follows during a major crisis, explicitly lists fuel redistribution as a primary action in the first 48 hours of any declared emergency response. That plan was written before you started storing. The protection here is not complicated. In most states, the threshold between personal storage and what emergency statutes classify as a commercial quantity, the level that triggers seizure orders, sits at 25 gallons or more stored at a single address. Stay under that line. Split a larger supply across 2 legally registered locations, if you have the option. Use a fuel stabilizer, a chemical additive you mix into gasoline that prevents it from breaking down over time, the same way salt preserves meat. And a legal 20-gallon distributed reserve stays usable for up to 2 years. That entire setup costs less than a large pizza with a 2-liter and a tip. And still haven't gotten to the Cold War item. Here's the first clue. It is not something you store in gallons. It is not something you store in cans. Hold that. Because item 2 is the one almost nobody sees coming. Something the government has the authority to ration down to individual households with nothing more than a signed declaration. Something your grandparents kept without ever thinking about it. That is where we go next. You have been building your food supply for 2 years. Freeze-dried meals, sealed buckets of rice and beans, canned goods stacked 3 rows deep in the basement. It took discipline and real money. You feel good about it. Then a regional supply chain collapse forces the governor to invoke Emergency Food Distribution Authority. And suddenly, your 3-person household is legally entitled to no more than a defined ration, and what you have above that number is subject to equalization. This is documented history, not theory. During World War II, the United States federal government implemented mandatory rationing under Executive Order 9280, a presidential order signed in 1942 that gave the Secretary of Agriculture authority to control the distribution of every food commodity in the country. Citizens were issued ration books. Stockpiling above your assigned ration was a federal offense. That happened here, in this country, within living memory. The modern mechanism is different, but equally real. When a food emergency is declared, bulk stored food transitions from personal property into what legal statutes call a hoarded good. Over 30 U.S. states have anti-hoarding laws in the books right now. Most of them are written broadly enough to apply to private preppers. Think of it this way. Your basement supply looks exactly the same to a county emergency manager as a warehouse full of product looks to a retailer. It is inventory. And inventory gets redistributed. The U.S. Army Survival Manual FM 305.70, the official field guide used to train soldiers in resource management under austere conditions, dedicates an entire section to minimum viable cache management specifically, because visible, consolidated, large quantity stores are always the first thing inventoried in any resource-constrained environment. That principle does not stop at the military. The strategy is distribution. Keep your food stores in unlabeled, opaque containers wherever legally possible. Divide your total supply across multiple locations. A sealed cache in a vehicle, a portion stored at a relative's address, a modest amount in a non-residential storage unit. A single 24-pound bucket of long-term rice costs less than 3 fast food combo meals. Spreading that across 2 addresses instead of 1 costs nothing. The cost of losing a 2-year supply to a redistribution order is 2 years. Notice what is on this list so far. Fuel. Food. Neither of them looks like a prep item from the outside. Neither comes with tactical branding. Neither photographs well for a gear video. That is not an accident. That is exactly the point. The items that keep you alive are the ones that blend into a normal household. And item 3 has been part of normal households since before any of us were born, until we decided the system would always work. It is the morning after a major cyber attack on the U.S. banking infrastructure. Every ATM within 30 miles is offline. Every point-of-sale terminal is returning errors. Your phone shows your account balance just fine. But the number on that screen cannot buy you anything. You have 4 children and 72 hours of food in the house, and every transaction you attempt is rejected. Now imagine you had $600 in physical cash distributed across 3 locations, and 2 1-ounce silver coins stored at home. And somewhere inside the emergency declaration signed overnight, there is a provision, entirely legal under existing U.S. law. That restricts the private holding of precious metals above a specific threshold. This is not hypothetical. Executive Order 6102, signed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on April 5, 1933, made it a federal crime for U.S. citizens to own more than 5 ounces of gold. Citizens were required to surrender their holdings to the Federal Reserve in exchange for paper currency at a fixed government rate. Anyone found holding above the legal limit faced 10 years in federal prison and a $10,000 fine. That happened in America. It was not lifted until 1974, 41 years after it was signed. Cash itself faces a different but equally documented threat. Under civil asset forfeiture laws, legal provisions that allow law enforcement to seize property suspected of connection to criminal activity without a conviction and sometimes without a charge. Cash is the single most commonly seized asset in the United States. The Institute for Justice, a national civil liberties law firm that has studied forfeiture extensively, found that the average federal forfeiture involves amounts well under $10,000. In plain terms, in a disrupted emergency environment, a large visible cash supply makes you a target under existing law. The strategy is small denominations distributed invisibly, a fireproof document safe at home holding $1 to $500 in 1s, 5s, and 20s, a smaller amount sealed in your vehicle, a minimal amount on your person. Rotating small bills is critical because in a real emergency, no one makes change for $100 and nobody will try. That distributed $300 cash reserve costs $300. The cost of having nothing when the grid goes down is everything you cannot buy. Here's the clue I'm going to give you about item 5, the one I have been holding back since the start. It is something you take, not something you carry. It does not protect you from a disaster after it happens. It protects your body from what the disaster puts into the air before you even know the disaster is occurring. That is one clue. Hold it. Because item 4 connects directly to why item 5 matters as much as it does. The hospital 3 miles from your house is running on backup power. It is day 5 of a blackout. A county official has identified 17 residential generators in your zip code. Because every generator installation above a certain wattage requires a permit in most jurisdictions. And that permit is a searchable public record. There's a knock at your door. The generator in your garage has just been classified as critical medical infrastructure. You have 20 minutes to cooperate. This has legal precedent in multiple states. California, New York, and Florida each maintain emergency commandeering statutes, laws that give state officials the authority to requisition privately owned equipment during a declared emergency when that equipment is deemed necessary for public safety or medical response. During the COVID-19 pandemic, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo invoked emergency powers in March 2020 to seize ventilators, the machines that breathe for critically ill patients, from private hospitals and redistribute them to facilities with higher patient loads. The same category of legal authority applies to generators, water pumps, and communications equipment under state emergency codes. The mechanism is permit records. If you installed a whole home standby generator, the kind hardwired to your natural gas line that kicks on automatically when the grid fails, that installation is on file with your municipality. It is searchable. It is exactly the kind of record a county emergency coordinator uses to build a requisition list on day 1 of a major grid failure. You signed the permit. You put yourself on the list. The distinction that matters is portable versus permitted. A portable gasoline-powered generator stored in your garage does not require a permit in most jurisdictions. It does not appear in any searchable public database. It is, legally and practically, invisible to a requisition sweep. A quality 2,000-watt portable unit, enough to run a refrigerator, 2 lights, and a phone charging station simultaneously, costs less than 2 months of most streaming subscriptions combined. The Department of Homeland Security's Household Preparedness Guidelines list backup power as a Tier 1 investment. A portable unit fulfills that recommendation without the permit trail. The pattern on this list has become clear by now. Every item the government moves on first is something that makes you self-sufficient. Fuel, food, cash, power. When you have all 4, you do not need the system. And that brings us to the one that breaks every pattern on this list. The one the government has been buying in classified quantities for over 50 years. The one they have made nearly impossible for you to legally obtain in meaningful amounts. Every item on this list has been pointing toward this one. You just did not see it yet. Here's everything you already know about it. It is something you take, not something you store in cans or carry in a bag. It does multiple jobs, but only one of them matters in the scenario where you actually need it. The government has purchased enough of it to supply every federal employee in the country. And it must be in your hand before the emergency you need it forever arrives, because taking it after the fact does nothing. You are 1 sentence away from knowing exactly what it is. It is a Tuesday morning. There is no news alert, no sirens. Your phone is not buzzed. But approximately 200 miles away, a nuclear facility has experienced a coolant failure. The same category of mechanical failure that melted down Reactor 4 at Chernobyl in Ukraine in 1986, and 3 reactors at Fukushima Daiichi in Japan in 2011. The radioactive plume, a cloud of invisible particles traveling on wind currents, is moving at 30 miles per hour. In 6 hours, it reaches your zip code. You will not feel it when it arrives. You will not smell it or taste it, but your body is absorbing it with every breath. In 12 to 48 hours from now, you will begin to understand what it did, unless you had already taken the one compound that blocks it at the cellular level. The item is potassium iodide, a salt compound with the same basic chemistry as table salt, but formulated specifically for medical use, that blocks your thyroid gland from absorbing radioactive iodine-131, the most common and most dangerous particle released in any nuclear or radiological emergency. Here is exactly how it works. Your thyroid gland onoektros, small butterfly-shaped organ at the base of your throat that regulates your metabolism, your energy levels, and your hormone balance, cannot distinguish between safe iodine and radioactive iodine. When radioactive iodine-131 enters your body through the air you breathe or the water you drink, your thyroid absorbs it exactly the same way it absorbs the harmless kind. And then it sits there, irradiating the tissue from the inside out for weeks. Potassium iodide works like a parking space. If you fill the space before the radioactive particle arrives, there is no room left for the dangerous version. Your thyroid absorbs the safe iodide, fills to capacity, and the radioactive iodine passes through your system without being stored. It is the medical equivalent of locking your door before the intruder reaches your street, not after they are already inside. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has formally approved potassium iodide for exactly this purpose. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the federal body that oversees every civilian nuclear facility in the United States, maintains official guidance stating that potassium iodide tablets should be pre-distributed to all households within 10 miles of an operating nuclear power plant. There are 93 operating nuclear reactors across the United States right now. The NRC's own data shows approximately 3 million Americans live within that 10-mile emergency planning zone. The government's response? Distribute tablets to a fraction of those households. Maintain a national stockpile for federal responders under the Strategic National Stockpile managed by the Department of Health and Human Services, and allow civilian over-the-counter access to become complicated through a combination of pharmacy stocking gaps and regulatory friction. Here's what happened after Fukushima in 2011. When 3 reactors in Japan began melting down, the FDA issued public guidance warning Americans not to self-purchase or stockpile potassium iodide tablets independently. The stated reason was that unsupervised self-administration could cause harm in certain medical conditions. The practical effect was a market run that cleared most online retailers of available civilian stock within 48 hours. The government's Strategic National Stockpile had adequate reserves for federal responders. Civilian supply was gone before most people understood what they were even looking for. Potassium iodide tablets are available right now, today, under brand names including ThyroShield and IOSat, sold in blister packs of 14 tablets, enough for a 14-day protection window per person. The FDA-approved adult dosage is 130 milligrams, taken once daily beginning at or just before the time of exposure, as directed by emergency authorities. A single pack costs less than what you spent on lunch today. For a family of 4, you need 4 packs. That is the cost of a single fast food outing for the family. But here is the detail that makes this item unlike every other item on this list. You cannot retroactively protect yourself with it. The timing window is not forgiving. Once radioactive iodine has already been absorbed by your thyroid, potassium iodide does nothing. The protection window opens before the plume arrives, meaning before the emergency alert, before the sirens, before most people even know something went wrong. The government knows this. That is why the Strategic National Stockpile is pre-positioned. Your supply needs to be pre-positioned in exactly the same way. On your shelf, tonight. Not ordered after the news break. This is the item the prepping industry does not market aggressively because there is no tactical version of it. It does not come in camo packaging. It does not attach to a MOLLE vest, the webbing system on tactical gear used to clip pouches and accessories. It will not photograph well for a gear post. But it is the single item on this list that the federal government has maintained a multi-million dose classified reserve of continuously for over 50 years. And unlike fuel, food, cash, or a generator, there is no version of a government seizure that takes it away from you once it is already in your body. That is the one they cannot commandeer after the fact. 5 items. Fuel that stops being yours the moment a declaration form gets signed. Bulk food that 30 states can legally reclassify as a hoarded good. Cash and precious metals subject to laws that have already been used in this country once. Generators on permit records that flag your address before the knock at the door ever comes. And a 14-tablet pack, the weight of a few coins, the cost of a sandwich, that the government has stockpiled in classified quantities for 50 years and hopes you never think to buy for yourself. That is the protocol. The people who make it through catastrophic events are not the luckiest people in the room. They are the people who had a working plan when everyone else was still refreshing the newsfeed. They knew which line they were on before the declaration got signed. You just did what they won't. If this changed how you think about what you own and who can take it, share it with one person who is actively prepping right now. Not for the view count. Because the window between now and the next declared emergency is the only window any of this is still actionable. The complete 72-hour seizure protection protocol, every item staged, every legal threshold mapped, every distribution strategy laid out before the knock arrives, is already on this channel. Stay ready.